My name is Lilia Brennan. I'm a 29-year-old sergeant in the United States Army, and for the last 3 years, I've been raising my sister's 4 children as if they were my own. I've passed on promotions, drained my savings, and put my own dreams on hold. But that wasn't enough. They didn't just ask me to take a hardship discharge to become their full-time nanny. They ordered me to personally execute my own dreams, my honor, and my future. But there's one thing they don't know. 3 years in their chaos has taught me a kind of battlefield tactic the military academy never could. They think they've cornered me. In reality, they just gave me a new mission. If you've ever been asked by your own family to sacrifice your future for their selfishness, let me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and prepare for a war fought on the home front. My 29th birthday began at 0500 hours, the same way the previous 1095 days had. The alarm on my phone didn't so much wake me as it simply signaled the start of the next shift. I swung my legs out of bed, the familiar ache in my lower back a dull, constant companion. The first objective was the kitchen. It was, as always, a battlefield left over from the night before. A sticky residue of spilled soda on the counter, a scattering of colorful Lucky Charms across the linoleum floor like tiny sugary landmines, and a sink overflowing with dishes. I didn't sigh. I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. Exhaustion had hollowed me out, leaving only the muscle memory of duty. I cleaned. I moved with an efficiency born of repetition. I wiped down the counters, swept the floor, and loaded the dishwasher. Then I started breakfast. 4 bowls of cereal, 4 glasses of milk, 4 lunch boxes lined up on the counter. I made 4 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches on Wonder Bread, meticulously cutting the crusts off for the youngest, Nora. I packed 4 bags of goldfish crackers, 4 juice boxes, 4 apples. The motions were automatic, a drill I could perform in my sleep. Around 6:30, my sister Sophia drifted downstairs, wrapped in a silk robe, her face a mask of weary complaint. She yawned, stretching theatrically. "God, I barely slept a wink," she murmured, ignoring the pristine kitchen around her. She walked past me to the coffee maker I'd already prepared, poured herself a mug, and then turned, holding out a crumpled piece of paper. "Here's the grocery list. We're out of everything." I took the list. My eyes scanned the familiar items. More milk, more bread, more of the expensive organic yogurt only she ate. My name wasn't on the list. Neither were the words, "Happy Birthday." To her, I wasn't a person with a day of celebration. I was a function, a piece of household machinery that kept everything running. My existence had become invisible. An hour later, I was herding the 4 kids, Logan, Ellie, Hunter, and Nora, into my aging Honda Civic. The usual morning chaos ensued. Hunter couldn't find his left shoe. Nora was crying because Ellie had looked at her the wrong way. I arbitrated the disputes with the detached calm of a seasoned negotiator, my voice even and low. "Hunter, your shoe is under the couch." "Nora, use your words." "Ellie, personal space." As I pulled out of the driveway, the local Fayetteville radio station crackled to life. An upbeat DJ shouted, "And a big happy birthday to everyone celebrating today," before launching into a cheesy, generic, happy birthday song. I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. 29. A bitter smile touched my lips. I could feel the familiar burn behind my eyes, the sting of tears threatening to fall. But my training kicked in. You don't cry on duty. You compartmentalize. You push it down. You focus on the mission. And the mission for today was getting 4 kids to school on time. The rest of the day was a blur of errands, laundry, and meal prep. The evening brought the real ambush. Sophia called me into the living room around 8. "Lilia, we need to have a family meeting," she announced. Her husband, Blake, was on the cracked screen of an old iPad propped against a stack of magazines. He was deployed overseas, a fact Sophia used as both a shield and a weapon. For a fleeting, foolish moment, a spark of hope flickered within me. Maybe this was it. Maybe they'd remembered. A surprise. It was a surprise, but not the one I'd hoped for. Sophia sat down, her face arranged into an expression of grave sincerity. "Lilia," she began, her voice dripping with practiced emotion. "We are so grateful for everything you've done these past 3 years." The flicker of hope grew brighter. I waited. "And that's why we know you'll understand," she continued, the pivot so smooth it was almost imperceptible. "With the new baby coming, we need a more permanent solution." I felt my stomach clench. Before I could process her words, Blake's voice, tinny and condescending, chimed in from the iPad. "We've already looked into it, Leah. You're eligible to file for a hardship discharge from the Army. It's for soldiers with unique family circumstances." He smiled, a smug, self-satisfied expression. "It's time you had a real purpose, Lilia. A real family purpose." Each word was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked the air from my lungs. A hardship discharge. To voluntarily end my career. 11 years of service. 11 years of pushing myself. Of earning the rank of sergeant. Of meticulously building a record that would get me into officer candidate school. My one deeply held dream. To throw it all away to become a permanent, unpaid nanny. I must have looked as stunned as I felt because Sophia leaned forward, placing her hand on my arm in a gesture of false comfort. She delivered the final, humiliating blow, her voice soft and poisonous. "Think about it, sweetie. This is your chance to really be a part of this family, instead of just playing soldier all the time. The kids, they already see you as their mother." That was it. That was the phrase that broke through the shock and exhaustion. They had taken my love, my sacrifice, and twisted it into a set of chains. They had used my affection for my nieces and nephews to build a cage around my future. They didn't just want my service, they wanted ownership of my life. I didn't argue, I didn't raise my voice. The disciplined soldier inside me took control. My silence was more profound, more dangerous than any scream could ever be. I slowly stood up, my posture erect, my back straight. I looked at Sophia's expectant face, then at Blake's self-congratulatory smirk on the iPad screen. My voice, when it came out, was level, devoid of all emotion, as cold and hard as steel. "I have received the message." I turned without another word and walked to my room, the sound of my footsteps unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. I closed the door behind me, the click of the latch sounding like a chambered round. I didn't cry. I walked over to the small desk in the corner, sat down, and opened my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my movements precise and economical. I didn't search for the forms for a hardship discharge. I opened a new, blank Word document. At the top of the page, I typed 2 words: Operation Self-Rescue. The mission had been issued, but the commanding officer, the objective, and the terms of engagement had just changed. And as I sat there in the quiet dark, a single, burning question echoed in the ruins of my heart. How did I ever let it come to this? Staring at the 2 words glowing on my laptop screen, Operation Self-Rescue, the question from the abyss of my mind echoed again. How did I let it come to this? The answer wasn't a single event, but a slow, methodical siege that had taken place over 3 years. A campaign of manipulation so subtle, so perfectly executed, that I hadn't recognized the enemy lines until they were deep inside my own territory. It all started with a phone call. I was in my barracks room at Fort Bragg, polishing my boots for morning formation, when my phone rang. Sophia's name flashed on the screen. I answered with a smile, expecting to hear the latest antics from my nieces and nephews. What I got was a storm of perfectly calibrated hysterics. "Lilia, oh God, Lilia," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "Blake's being deployed. It's sudden. They're sending him overseas for a year. I can't do this alone with the 4 kids. I just can't." My soldier's heart, trained to respond to distress, kicked in immediately. My sister's heart, which loved those kids fiercely, ached for her. "Okay, Soph, breathe," I said, my voice calm and steady. "What do you need? I can take some leave. Come up for a week or 2 to help out." "A week?" Her sob turned into a desperate gulping sound. "I need you, Lilia. Really need you. Just for a few months. Just until I can get on my feet, maybe find a reliable daycare, get things organized. That's all I'm asking. Just a few months. I promise, I'll never, ever forget it. Just a few months. The phrase was a lullaby, a sweet reassurance that this was a temporary mission, a noble act to support family in a time of crisis. In the military, we understand short-term sacrifice for the good of the unit. I saw this as no different. I agreed without hesitation. I put in the paperwork for a temporary reassignment for family hardship, assuring my commander it was a short-term situation. Looking back now, I can see it so clearly. It wasn't a cry for help. It was the perfectly camouflaged opening salvo of an invasion. Just a few months became the most elastic measurement of time I'd ever known. The first time I brought up returning to my unit, about 4 months in, Sophia's face crumpled. "But Logan is having so much trouble in school," she'd said, her eyes welling up. "His teacher says he's acting out. You're the only one he really listens to, Lilia. He needs your stability right now." And so I stayed. How could I leave my nephew when he needed me? The guilt was a physical weight on my chest. A few months after that, the reason changed. I had my bags half packed when Sophia came to me with a stack of bills. "My hours got cut at Macy's," she said, her voice a defeated whisper. "We're barely making it, Leah. We just can't afford a full-time sitter right now. I don't know what we're going to do." So I unpacked. I started funneling more of my own salary into the household account, telling myself it was temporary. The mission parameters had changed, but the objective, helping my family, remained the same. Then Nora got a series of nasty ear infections. Sophia would call me at work, crying. "The doctor said she needs to be watched closely. I don't trust anyone else with her when she's sick. Please, Lilia." Each request was wrapped in the language of love, of necessity, of crisis. Each one made it impossible to say no without feeling like a monster. My responsibilities grew exponentially. First, it was just school runs and helping with homework. Then I was planning and cooking every meal because Sophia was too stressed. Then I was managing the household budget because she couldn't face the numbers. I went from being a support unit to being the commanding officer, the logistics chief, and the frontline soldier all at once, without ever realizing I'd been deployed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the gratitude faded. The thank yous grew scarce, replaced by an air of expectation. My presence, my sacrifice, became the new normal. It became my duty. I'll never forget the day I had to cancel my spot in the basic leader course, a critical step for my promotion. Ellie had a dental emergency, a cracked molar, and Sophia had a migraine she just couldn't shake. I spent 5 hours in a pediatric dentist's waiting room, rescheduling my entire military career path with a few text messages. When I finally got home, exhausted and demoralized, Sophia didn't ask about Ellie's tooth. She didn't thank me. She just glanced at the clock on the wall and frowned. "What took you so long? The kids are starving." In that moment, I realized that in her eyes, my life, my career, my dreams, they held no value. They were secondary concerns, easily discarded in favor of her family's immediate needs. My sacrifice had been fully, completely normalized. It was no longer a gift. It was an expectation. The final lock on the cage clicked into place a year ago. I was offered an incredible opportunity, a promotion that came with a 3-month leadership course at another base. It was my ticket to OCS, the dream I'd been working towards since I was a private. I knew it would be hard, but I presented Sophia with a plan. A list of vetted sitters, a detailed schedule, a budget. I thought I was being responsible. She saw it as an act of treason. She threw herself into my arms, her body shaking with what I now recognize as a brilliantly staged panic attack. "You can't go," she wailed, tears streaming down her face. "If you leave, who will take care of the kids? Who will take care of me? You're abandoning us, Lilia. You're abandoning your family." She weaponized the word, family, turning it from a source of strength into a prison sentence. And I let her. For the first time in my life, I chose them over my career. I called my commanding officer and turned down the promotion. It's suffocating, isn't it? The slow, creeping boil of obligation. If you have ever had a promise of just a few months turn into a few years, Do me a favor, hit that like button to show a fellow soldier some support, and just comment with the single word, boundaries. It's a word I was about to learn the hard way. That night, lying in bed, I'd felt noble, selfless, like a hero in my own quiet story. I'd made the ultimate sacrifice for my family. But now, sitting in the dark with the cold glow of the laptop on my face, I see the truth. I wasn't a hero. I was a willing casualty in a war I hadn't even known I was fighting. But a casualty can still learn the art of war. And my real training was just about to begin. A casualty can learn the art of war, and my real training was about to begin. The moment that decision solidified in my mind, the fog of exhaustion and despair burned away, replaced by the cold, clear focus of a soldier with a new mission. For 3 years, I had been a peacekeeper in a war zone of my sister's making. Now, I was going on the offensive. A successful operation, however, isn't one with emotion. It's one with strategy. That night, I pulled out an old, dog-eared copy of Sun Tzu's The Art of War from the bottom of my footlocker. Know your enemy and know yourself, I read, and you need not fear the result of 100 battles. My war would not be fought with confrontations and screaming matches. That was Sophia's territory, her strength. Mine would be a campaign of quiet precision, fought in the shadows. My first move was to make a call. Not to a friend to vent, but to a commander for a strategy session. Master Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had been my platoon sergeant years ago. She was tough, pragmatic, and had a zero-tolerance policy for nonsense. I found a quiet corner in the backyard, the cell phone pressed to my ear. I laid out the situation in concise, factual terms, ending with their demand for my discharge. She was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gravelly and devoid of pity. All right, Brennan. You've been pinned down in a hostile AO for 3 years. It's time for an extraction. Yes, Master Sergeant, I breathed, relief washing over me. Listen to me and listen good, she commanded. This isn't a family drama anymore. This is an operation. You will treat it as such. That means intel, logistics, and communication security. Your sister is the opposing force. You do not let the OPFOR know your next move. You gather your assets, you secure your exit route, and you move out under the cover of darkness. Am I clear, Sergeant? Crystal clear, Master Sergeant. Good, now get to work. She hung up. It was the most validating conversation I'd had in 3 years. Phase 1 began immediately, reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. While Sophia slept in, I was up at Oro 4:30, my laptop open. I navigated to the Army's Human Resources Command website, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I found the regulations for compassionate reassignments and the process for terminating one. I took meticulous notes in a password-protected file, detailing every form, every required signature, every step in the chain of command. Knowledge is power, and I was arming myself. Next, I secured my finances. Using my phone, I opened a new online checking account with Chime, an app that wouldn't send incriminating bank statements to the house. I set up an automatic transfer for a small portion of my paycheck to be deposited into this new account. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was my op fund. Finally, I began documenting everything. I bought a simple spiral notebook from the dollar store and kept it hidden. In it, I recorded every unreasonable demand, every casually cruel remark, every time Sophia used my debit card for non-essential purchases like her weekly manicure or another decorative pillow from Home Goods. I wasn't collecting this information for a confrontation. It was for me. It was ammunition to fortify my own resolve, a stark, written record of the cage they had built around me. Phase 2 was logistics. A successful withdrawal requires a secure fallback position. I called a buddy from my old unit, Sergeant Evans, who I knew had a spare room in his house just outside Fort Bragg. Evans, I said, keeping my voice low. I need a short-term rental, starting ASAP, no questions asked. Got it covered, Brennan, he replied, true to the soldier's code. Room's yours whenever you need it. That night, after the kids were asleep and Sophia was engrossed in some reality TV show, I quietly pulled my large olive-drab duffel bag from the back of the closet. The process of packing was a ritual, a sacred act of reclaiming myself. I didn't pack everyday clothes. I packed my identity. My perfectly pressed dress uniform, the Army service uniform, went in first, sealed in a protective bag. Next were my medals, including the Army Commendation Medal I'd received for my last tour. Then came my books on leadership, their pages filled with notes and highlights. Finally, I placed a small framed photo of my parents, their smiling faces a reminder of a time when family meant unconditional support. I zipped the bag shut and slid it deep under my bed. It was my go bag, my escape plan made tangible. Phase 3 was the most complex, training the in-place forces. I couldn't and wouldn't just abandon the children. They were innocent casualties in Sophia's war, but I couldn't be their sole provider anymore. It was time to empower them. I started treating Logan, at 15, like my junior NCO. Instead of doing everything myself, I began delegating. "Logan," I said one afternoon, handing him the grocery list and $20. "Your mission is grocery procurement. You will acquire every item on this list and return with the correct change. Understood?" He blinked, surprised, but a slow grin spread across his face. "Yes, Aunt Lelia." Ellie was put in charge of what I called Operation Homework. She was responsible for making sure the two younger ones finished their assignments before they could have any screen time. At first, there was resistance, whining, protests, but I held firm. My voice remained calm, authoritative, the same tone I used with new privates. They were used to my sister's chaotic yelling or my previous weary compliance. This new, unshakable command structure was something they slowly, grudgingly, began to respect. I wasn't just teaching them life skills. I was giving them responsibility, showing them they were more capable than their mother had ever allowed them to be. Finally, after a week of meticulous preparation, every piece was in place. The forms were downloaded and filled out on my laptop. The supporting documents were scanned and attached. My fallback position was secured. The kids had a new routine. That night, I sat at my desk, the door closed. I could hear Sophia in the living room, laughing loudly at something on television. On my screen, the email was ready. The cursor blinked rhythmically over the send button. It was a simple click, a tiny movement of my index finger, but it felt as monumental as stepping off a cliff. I took a deep, steadying breath, the kind we take before breaching a door. Maria's words echoed in my head. "It's time you fight for yourself, Sergeant." I closed my eyes, and I clicked. The email was gone. There was no taking it back, no retreat. The extraction had officially begun. An electrifying wave of terror and absolute freedom washed over me all at once. The breathtaking, heart-stopping feeling of a paratrooper stepping out of the plane and into the vast, empty sky. The email containing my request for reassignment was approved faster than I ever anticipated. It landed in my personal inbox 3 days later, a sterile official PDF from HRC that felt like a signed pardon. My extraction date was set. I chose the following Saturday. According to her meticulously updated calendar on the fridge, Sophia had a 10 a.m. nail appointment. The kids had a playdate at a friend's house. The window of opportunity was clear. That morning, I followed the routine one last time, a ghost going through the motions. I made breakfast, packed snacks for the playdate, and dropped the kids off, giving each of them a hug that lingered a little longer than usual. When I returned, the house was empty, silent. It felt vast and strange without the constant hum of chaos. I walked to my room, grabbed the duffel bag from under the bed, and slung it over my shoulders. It felt lighter than I expected. I did one final walkthrough of the house, not out of sentimentality, but like a soldier clearing a building. There was no nostalgia, no pull of attachment, just the quiet, profound relief of a prisoner on the verge of freedom. On the gleaming granite of the kitchen island, I placed a small white note card. On it, I had written 7 words in neat, block letters. "I have moved out. I'll be in touch." It was not an explanation. It was not an apology. It was a statement of fact. A notification, not a negotiation. I walked out the front door, not bothering to lock it behind me. In my Honda, I turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life. I pulled out of the driveway and pointed the car toward Fort Bragg. I did not, even for a second, look in the rearview mirror. The room I rented from Sergeant Evans was in a quiet neighborhood in Fayetteville, a 10-minute drive from the base. It was small, probably half the size of my room at Sophia's, with a single bed, a small desk, and a closet. To me, it felt like a palace. It was clean. It was orderly. Most importantly, it was silent. The only sound was the gentle hum of the air conditioner. I dropped my duffel bag on the floor and breathed in the scent of pine cleaner and freedom. I spent the entire afternoon engaged in a sacred ritual. I unpacked my duffel bag, transforming the sterile room into my sanctuary. I hung my Army service uniform in the closet, ensuring there wasn't a single wrinkle. I arranged my books on leadership on the desk, their spines straight and aligned. I took out my medals, their ribbons vibrant against the dark felt of their cases, and began to polish the metal with a soft cloth until each one gleamed. I shined my combat boots until I could see my own determined reflection in the toe caps. Each methodical action was a reclamation, a way of piecing back together the person I had been before the last 3 years had eroded her down to nothing but a function. That evening, for the first time in 1,098 days, I cooked a meal for one. I went to the local Food Lion and bought a single, thick-cut sirloin steak and a potato. Back in my quiet room, I seared the steak in a hot pan and baked the potato in the microwave. I ate it sitting at my small desk in absolute, deafening silence. There were no children shouting, no reality TV blaring, no demands for a glass of milk or a broken toy to be fixed. Just the simple, satisfying taste of a meal I had prepared for myself, to be enjoyed by myself. I had forgotten what this felt like, this profound, uncomplicated peace. It was the quiet contentment of a soldier, safe behind friendly lines after a long, grueling mission. On Monday morning, I reported to my new unit. I stood tall in my crisp, clean uniform, my boots shining. When the company's first sergeant saw me, a man with a chest full of ribbons and a reputation for being tougher than coffin nails, he stood up from behind his desk. A smile broke through his stern expression. "Welcome back, Sergeant Brennan," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We heard about your situation. Damn glad to have you back in the ranks." The simple act of being addressed by my rank, of being seen as a soldier and not a caregiver, felt like a balm on a raw wound. Before I was dismissed, I ran into my old company commander in the hallway. He stopped, his eyes widening in recognition. He shook my hand, his grip firm and strong. "Brennan," he said, and his smile was genuine. "It's good to see you. We missed you. The platoon hasn't been the same without your discipline." That was it. That was the moment the dam finally broke. I managed a tight nod, unable to speak past the lump forming in my throat. I turned and walked away quickly before he could see the tears welling in my eyes. His simple words of recognition, of value, meant more to me than 1,000 hollow thank yous from my sister. It was proof that I had a place, a purpose, that I was good at what I did. I was home. I threw myself into my work with a renewed, ferocious energy. I led physical training with a vengeance, ran drills with precision, and spent my evenings studying for the OCS entrance exam. The dream that had been a distant, hazy mirage was now sharp and clear on the horizon, within my grasp. I felt myself coming back to life, the hollowed-out parts of me slowly filling back up with purpose and pride. 3 days of this blissful, productive peace went by. 3 days of order and respect. I was at the post gym, halfway through a punishing set of bench presses, sweat dripping from my brow. I felt powerful, stronger than I had in years. My phone, sitting on the floor beside the bench, buzzed. It was an on-post number from the company headquarters. I answered, my breathing heavy. A stern, unfamiliar voice was on the other end. It was the charge of quarters NCO. "Sergeant Brennan," he said, his tone clipped and official. "The first sergeant wants to see you in his office, immediately." I felt a jolt of confusion. "I'm in the middle of a workout, can it?" "Now, Sergeant," he cut me off. He paused and then added the 4 words that made the 200-pound barbell on my chest feel like a feather. "There are military police here." The line went dead. My heart stopped. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I knew, with a sudden, sickening certainty, what had happened. The storm had arrived. Sophia hadn't accepted my withdrawal. She had decided to counterattack, and she had aimed her first volley directly at the one thing a soldier values most: their career and their honor. The walk from the post gym to the company headquarters was the longest of my life. I didn't bother changing out of my sweat-soaked PT uniform. Each step was heavy, deliberate. The familiar, everyday sounds of Fort Bragg, the distant pop, pop, pop of a rifle range, the rumble of a passing Humvee, the rhythmic chants of a platoon on a run, faded into a dull, background roar. The only sound I could clearly hear was the frantic hammering of my own heart against my ribs. Military police. The words ricocheted inside my skull. It was a soldier's worst nightmare. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. Sophia had escalated the conflict to a level I had never imagined. She had brought the war to my home turf. I walked into the first sergeant's office. The air was thick with a tense, formal silence. My first sergeant, the same man who had welcomed me back with a smile just days ago, sat behind his immaculate desk. His face was a mask of stern disappointment. And standing at ease against the wall, positioned between the American flag and the unit guidon, were two MPs. They were tall, impassive, their crisp uniforms and MP brassards radiating an unassailable authority. "Sergeant Brennan," First Sergeant began, his voice flat, stripped of all its previous warmth. He didn't tell me to sit. I stood at attention in the center of the room. "We've received a formal complaint from a civilian, your sister, Mrs. Sophia Miller." He picked up a piece of paper from his desk, a sworn statement. "Mrs. Miller alleges that on the day you left her residence, you committed larceny of $500 cash and were responsible for the willful destruction of her personal property." The words hit me like shrapnel. Larceny. Destruction of property. These weren't just accusations, they were formal charges under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Career-ending charges. Everything I had worked for, every sacrifice, every ounce of discipline, was suddenly hanging by the thread of my sister's lies. The blood roared in my ears as First Sergeant began to read from Sophia's statement. It was a masterpiece of malicious fiction. She had woven a story of a gentle, concerned sister, herself, simply asking about my future plans. In her version, I had flown into a rage, screaming that I wouldn't be their slave anymore. She claimed I had become a madwoman, that I had picked up a table lamp and smashed it against the wall, then taken a knife from the kitchen and slashed the arm of their living room sofa. And then came the masterstroke of cruelty. The statement alleged that after my rampage, I had stolen $500 in cash from her purse. Money, she tearfully claimed, that Blake had just sent home for the new baby's medical expenses. As a final venomous flourish, she added a line that was clearly designed for maximum damage. "I was terrified," she wrote. "I truly feared for my children's safety." She had painted me as a violent, unstable monster who stole from an unborn child. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound, it was breathtaking. My first, primal instinct was to scream, to rage against the injustice, to shout that every word was a calculated, poisonous lie. I could feel the heat rising in my face, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. But then, 11 years of training took over. When ambushed, the first objective is to maintain composure and seek cover. I forced the scream down. I unclenched my fists. I took a slow, deliberate breath, just as I had been taught, letting it out through my nose. I focused on a small crack in the ceiling above the first sergeant's head. I brought my heels together. I met his disappointed eyes without flinching. My voice, when I spoke, was steady. It was the voice of a non-commissioned officer, not a terrified sister. "First Sergeant," I said clearly and distinctly, "I categorically deny these allegations. I request a full and fair investigation into this matter. I have nothing to hide." My calm, formal response seemed to momentarily surprise them. It didn't fit the narrative of the unhinged person Sophia had described. A guilty person would have been emotional, defensive. A soldier stands their ground. There was a brief, loaded silence in the room. The interview was over quickly after that. The MPs took my statement, which was short and factual. I stated that I had left a note, and that was all. No yelling, no destruction, no theft. The process was cold and clinical. When it was done, First Sergeant informed me of the consequences. Sergeant Brennan, pending the outcome of this investigation, you are temporarily suspended from all duties. You will surrender your weapon to the arms room immediately. Furthermore, you are restricted to post. You will not leave Fort Bragg for any reason without my express permission. It was a public shaming. As I was escorted to the arms room by one of the MPs to turn in my M9 pistol, I could feel the eyes of every soldier in the headquarters on me. The barracks rumor mill operates faster than any official news channel. In the space of 15 minutes, I had gone from being a respected sergeant to a suspected criminal. My honor, the one thing I had left, was now officially in question. As I walked out of the building into the harsh Carolina sun, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life, I overheard the two MPs talking quietly behind me. This is a mess, one said. A classic he said, she said. Yeah, the other replied. We need to go to the scene, check out the alleged damages, and we need to question the witnesses. He paused. Especially the kids. My heart sank into the pit of my stomach. The kids. Logan, Ellie, Hunter, Nora. They were my weak point, my unprotected flank. What lies had Sophia been feeding them since I left? What stories had she coached them to tell? I had just stepped out of one ambush, only to realize I was walking directly into another. And this time, the ones holding the weapons would be the very children I had spent 3 years trying to protect. While I sat in the sterile confines of my temporary room, a prisoner of circumstance, the next phase of the battle was unfolding miles away. Sergeant Davis, a 20-year veteran MP with eyes that had seen every lie a soldier could tell, drove the patrol car. Beside him, Corporal Cole, younger and more by the book, reviewed the notes on his tablet. Sounds open and shut, Cole said. Deranged soldier, domestic dispute, steals money meant for a baby. Not a good look. Davis grunted, turning onto Sophia's quiet suburban street. Maybe, he said, his voice a low rumble. Maybe it's too perfect. People who fly into a rage don't usually leave a neat pile of broken lamp pieces in the corner. They pulled up to the house. Sophia answered the door on the first knock, her face a carefully constructed mask of sorrowful exhaustion. She ushered them inside, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. Thank you so much for coming, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't know what else to do. She pointed a shaky finger toward the living room. That's the lamp she threw. And the couch. She just ripped it. Davis's eyes swept the scene. The rip on the sofa was a small frayed tear on the armrest that looked months old. The broken lamp was, as he'd predicted, neatly contained in a dustpan in the corner. It was a stage, and Sophia was giving a command performance. Ma'am, we'll need to speak with the children, Davis said, his tone professional and flat. One at a time. We'll start with the oldest, Logan. A flicker of something, not concern but anxiety, crossed Sophia's face. Oh, of course, she said, recovering quickly. But please be gentle. He's just a boy. He might be in shock from, her outburst. Davis just nodded. Cole followed Sophia as she led them to a small den where Logan was sitting, staring at the floor. He's all yours, Sophia said before pulling the door almost completely shut, leaving it open just a crack. Davis quietly reached back and clicked it fully closed. The room was silent for a moment. Logan, a lanky 15-year-old, refused to look up. Logan, Davis began, his voice surprisingly gentle. My name is Sergeant Davis. This is Corporal Cole. We're just here to understand what happened the other day. The boy remained silent, his shoulders hunched. Cole cleared his throat, ready to press, but Davis held up a hand. He pulled up a chair and sat down, making himself less intimidating. Look, son, Davis said, leaning forward. We're not here to get anyone in trouble. We just need to know the truth. This is a very serious situation. Your aunt's entire career is on the line right now. That was the trigger. At the mention of Lilia's career, Logan's head snapped up. His eyes, which had been downcast and sullen, were now clear and blazing, with a fierce, sudden resolve. "It's a lie," he said, his voice low but perfectly steady. "Everything she told you, it's a lie." Davis and Cole exchanged a quick, surprised glance. "What do you mean, son?" Davis asked, keeping his voice even. "Aunt Lilia never yelled," Logan stated, the words coming out in a rush now, as if a dam had broken. "She never threw anything. My mom and my dad were on the iPad, and they told her she had to get out of the army. She just stood up and said, 'I have received the message.' That was it. Then she went to her room." He pointed in the direction of the living room. "That tear on the sofa. That happened last Christmas when my dad tried to move it by himself. And the lamp. My little brother Hunter broke that last week chasing the cat. My mom was going to throw it out anyway." Cole was scribbling furiously in his notepad. Davis leaned in closer. "What about the money, Logan?" "The $500. My mom spent it," Logan said without hesitation. The final, crucial piece of the story clicked into place, delivered with the simple certainty of truth. She bought a pair of designer shoes online from Zappos. The confirmation email is still in her inbox if you want to see it. The room fell silent again, this time filled with the weight of Logan's testimony. It was detailed, it was specific, and it was verifiable. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Logan?" Cole asked, his pen hovering over the page. "I'm positive," Logan said, his chin held high. His voice grew stronger, taking on a conviction that was far beyond his years. "Aunt Lilia taught me what honor is. She said it's about telling the truth, especially when it's hard. She's the one who took care of us for 3 years. She used her own pay to buy us groceries and take us to the doctor when we were sick, while my mom was out with her friends. Asking her to quit the army was bad enough." He looked Sergeant Davis straight in the eye, and the word he used next was filled with the righteous contempt of a grown man. "But lying to ruin her life? That's just despicable." Sometimes the smallest voice can carry the greatest honor. If you believe in the power of speaking the truth, no matter how hard it is, show your support for Logan by hitting that like button and commenting with the single word, honor. Logan's testimony was a bombshell that obliterated Sophia's entire story. It didn't just clear Lilia, it painted a damning portrait of Sophia herself. While Cole finished the interview, Davis stepped outside and, with a few taps on his phone, confirmed that a Zappos purchase for $485 had been made from an IP address at the house 2 days prior. The case collapsed instantly. When they were finished, they walked back into the living room where Sophia was waiting, her sorrowful expression still in place. Sergeant Davis stopped at the front door. He turned and looked at her, his eyes as cold and hard as granite. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Providing a false official statement to a military investigator is a serious federal offense. I suggest you think long and hard about that." The practiced look of anguish on Sophia's face dissolved, replaced by the pale, stark terror of someone who had just been caught. Back at the company headquarters, the report was filed. The investigation was closed. A few hours later, my phone rang in my quiet room. It was the charge of quarters NCO again. "Sergeant Brennan," he said. And this time, the clipped official tone was gone. It had been replaced by something I hadn't heard in days. Respect. "The first sergeant wants to see you. Right away." The walk back to the first sergeant's office felt even longer than the first time. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs again, but this time it was a beat of nervous anticipation, not dread. The respect in the CQ's voice had been unmistakable. Something had shifted. The tide had turned. I knocked on the familiar wooden door. "Enter," the first sergeant's voice boomed. I stepped inside, my back ramrod straight, and snapped to the position of attention. This time, there were no MPs. It was just First Sergeant and my company commander, Captain Evans, who was standing beside the desk. In a gesture that sent a shockwave of surprise through me, Captain Evans, an officer, stood up as I entered the room. It was a small but profound sign of respect, a silent acknowledgement that the dynamic had fundamentally changed. "Sergeant Brennan," Captain Evans began, his voice firm and serious. "On behalf of the entire chain of command, I need to formally apologize to you." I held his gaze, my own expression unreadable, my training keeping the flood of emotion at bay. "We acted on information that has been proven to be unequivocally false," he continued. "The stress and professional injury this has caused you are unacceptable. We failed to give you the benefit of the doubt that your exemplary record has earned. For that, I am sorry." First Sergeant stepped forward. "The way you handled yourself through this entire ordeal, Sergeant, with professionalism and restraint, is a testament to your character. The investigation is officially closed. You are fully exonerated." I allowed myself a single, sharp nod. The words washed over me, a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees. It wasn't just vindication. It was the restoration of my honor. It was the system I had dedicated my life to. The very institution my sister had tried to use against me, now standing up to defend me. "There's more," Captain Evans said, his expression hardening. "Due to the egregious nature of the false accusation against a service member, we have taken 2 additional actions." He picked up a document from the desk. "First, we have issued an official bar order against Mrs. Sophia Miller. Effective immediately, she is barred from entering any and all areas of Fort Bragg. She is not to contact you through any government or military channels." A wall. They had built a wall around me. Not just a personal boundary, but a fortified, legally enforceable perimeter. The relief was so immense it felt like I could finally breathe again after being held underwater. "Second," he went on, "we have forwarded the complete case file, including the evidence of a false official statement, to civilian law enforcement for their review. Her actions constitute a federal crime." I processed this silently. Sophia hadn't just failed in her attack. She had triggered a counteroffensive that now had her facing real legal consequences. The battle was truly over. "You are reinstated to full duties, effective immediately," First Sergeant said, a hint of the old warmth returning to his voice. "Your weapon has been returned to the arms room. Go pick it up." "And Brennan?" "Yes, First Sergeant?" "It's good to have you back." I returned to my small, quiet room, my mind reeling. I sat on the edge of my perfectly made bed, the silence no longer feeling like a reprieve, but like a vast, empty space. Just as I was processing the whiplash of the day, my phone buzzed. It was Logan. I answered, my throat suddenly tight. There was a hesitant silence on the other end, then his teenage voice, cracking with emotion. "Aunt Lilia, I'm sorry. For everything." A real smile, the first in what felt like a lifetime, spread across my face. It felt foreign and wonderful. "Logan," I said, my voice soft and thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "You have nothing to apologize for. You did the right thing. You acted with honor." I paused, letting the weight of the next words sink in. "I have never, ever been more proud of you than I am today." I heard him take a shaky breath on the other end. That brief, heartfelt conversation meant more to me than any formal apology from a captain. It was the ultimate validation. It was proof that the last 3 years, as painful as they were, hadn't been a complete waste. I had planted a seed of integrity in that chaotic household, and it had grown into something strong and brave. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of profound peace. My name was cleared. My honor was restored. My future was my own again. I pulled out my OCS prep books and laid them on my desk, my motivation burning brighter than ever. I was back on track. And then, the phone rang again. The caller ID flashed a name I didn't recognize, Cape Fear Valley Medical Center. My blood ran cold. I answered. It was Logan, but his voice was completely different. It was high-pitched, thin, and stretched with panic. "Aunt Lilia," he gasped, the words tumbling out over each other. "It's Mom. She collapsed. We're at the hospital. The doctors are saying it's serious, something with the baby. They said she might have to stay here for months." He took a gulp of air, and his next words landed like a mortar round in the center of my newfound peace. "We're home alone, Aunt Lilia. We're all alone." I stood there frozen, the phone pressed hard against my ear. Sophia. The woman who had, just hours ago, tried to utterly destroy me was now in danger. The children, the very reason I had to fight for my freedom, were once again without a guardian. I had just escaped. But fate, it seemed, was trying to drag me right back into the line of fire. This time, what in God's name was I supposed to do? I stood there, frozen, the phone pressed hard against my ear. The silence in my pristine, orderly room was deafening, a stark contrast to the panicked chaos erupting on the other end of the line. My mind was a maelstrom. Sophia, the architect of my near destruction, was now the one in crisis. The children, the anchors I had just cut myself free from, were adrift and calling for rescue. Every instinct I had spent 3 years suppressing, the urge to fix, to save, to sacrifice, roared back to life. It was a phantom limb, an ache for a burden I had just set down. For a dizzying moment, I felt the pull, the powerful toxic undertow of familial obligation threatening to drag me back under. But this time, I was a different soldier. The last week had forged something new in me, something hard and unbreakable. I would not act on instinct. I would act on intelligence. "Logan, listen to me," I said, my voice cutting through his panic with a calm authority that surprised even myself. "What's the doctor's name? What room is she in? Text me the details. I'm on my way." Before I moved, before I let emotion dictate my next action, I convened an emergency staff meeting. I sat on my bed and made 2 calls. The first was to Master Sergeant Maria Rodriguez. The second was to Logan. I put them both on a 3-way call. "All right," I said, my voice crisp. "Here's the situation." I laid out the facts. Sophia's hospitalization, the potential long-term stay, the 5 children now unsupervised. "I need your counsel." Maria's response was immediate and exactly what I expected. "You owe that woman nothing, Brennan," she said, her voice like gravel. "She tried to burn your career to the ground. Let her and her deadbeat husband figure it out. It's not your mission anymore." Then came Logan's voice, still shaky but desperate. "But we need help, Aunt Lilia. Ellie's trying, but the little ones, they're scared. I'm scared." There it was. The cold, hard logic of a soldier versus the desperate plea of a child I loved. The old me would have been torn apart by the conflict. The new me saw it as 2 pieces of intelligence to be weighed and considered. I listened to both, letting the silence hang for a moment. Then I made my decision. A decision forged not in guilt, but in strategy. A balance of compassion and self-preservation. "I'm not abandoning the kids," I stated, my voice leaving no room for argument. "But I'm not sacrificing my life again either. I will provide support, but it will be on my terms." I drove to Cape Fear Valley Medical Center. I found Sophia's room. She was lying in the hospital bed, looking small and pale, hooked up to an IV drip. The arrogance and manipulative energy were gone, replaced by a raw, pathetic vulnerability. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. "Lilia," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "I'm so sorry. I held up my hand, a sharp, definitive gesture that cut her off mid-sentence. "I'm not here for you, Sophia," I said, my voice as cold and sterile as the room around us. "I'm not here to listen to apologies. I'm here for my nieces and nephews. I will help, but these are the new rules of engagement." I stood over her bed like a commanding officer briefing a subordinate. "First, I am not moving back in. I will maintain my residence off-post. My life is my own. Second, I will come to the house each day after my duties at the base are complete. I will be there to supervise dinner and ensure homework is done. All other household duties will be managed by the children. Logan is now the ranking officer on site. He is in charge. I am merely an advisor. Third, I said, my eyes locking onto hers, Blake will transfer the full court-mandated amount of child support to my bank account via Zelle every Friday morning. Not when he feels like it, not after I have to chase him for it, every Friday. That money will be used for groceries and household expenses. The transaction log will be our record. I leaned in closer. If a single one of these conditions is violated, this agreement is terminated immediately. Am I understood? She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fear. The woman who had wielded guilt like a weapon was now utterly disarmed. Too weak to argue, too desperate to refuse, she could only manage a single, defeated nod. And so began what I internally called Operation Temporary Support. I executed my duties with the detached precision of a commander inspecting an outpost. I showed up at 17:30 hours every day. I didn't cook. I supervised Logan and Ellie as they followed a simple meal plan I had written out. I didn't clean. I inspected the chore chart, a detailed list of duties from taking out the trash to unloading the dishwasher, and ensured it was being followed. I became an organizer, a mentor, a stabilizing force, not a maid. And my own life remained my own. I never missed a day of PT at the base gym. I spent every evening from 2,000 to 2,200 hours with my OCS study materials. I was a firm anchor for the children, but I was also an impenetrable wall protecting my own time, my own space, and my own future. Throughout this period, Blake was a ghost. He called a handful of times, always full of hollow excuses about being slammed on deployment. The child support payments only arrived after I sent him a curt, one-sentence text message reminder each Friday afternoon. It became painfully clear that I wasn't just dealing with Sophia's irresponsibility, but Blake's cowardice as well. This hardened my resolve. I was plugging a temporary leak, not rebuilding a bridge they had both allowed to collapse. On a calendar in my room, I had circled a date 3 months from the day Sophia was admitted. 90 days. That was the limit. That was the end of the mission. Day after day, I executed the plan, and night after night, I would draw a neat X through another day on the calendar. 89 days left, 54, 17, 3, 2, 1. On the final night, I drew the last X, 90 days. The mission parameters were fulfilled. It was time for the final debriefing. The day Sophia was discharged from the hospital, holding a new baby boy, I was there. I drove her home, helped her get settled on the couch, and made sure the refrigerator was stocked and the older children knew their duties for the evening. There was an awkward, heavy silence in the house, the kind that follows a war. The children were quiet, watching me, watching their mother. Sophia herself looked smaller, drained of all the manipulative fire that had sustained her for so long. Once I was satisfied that the situation was stable, I stood in the middle of the living room. This was it. The final debriefing. I looked directly at my sister, my expression calm, my voice even. "My mission here is complete, Sophia," I said. The words were not harsh, but they were absolute. From this moment forward, this house and these children are your responsibility. Yours and Blake's. Her face, already pale, seemed to crumple. Tears welled in her eyes, the familiar weapon she had wielded so effectively for years. She reached out and grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly weak. "But I need you, Lilia," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't do this alone." For a single heartbeat, the ghost of old guilt stirred within me. But it was only a phantom. I looked down at her hand on mine, and then I did something the old Lilia never could have. Gently, but with unmistakable finality, I uncurled her fingers from my own. "No, Sophia," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You need to learn to stand on your own. I love my nieces and nephews, and I will never abandon them. But I can no longer live your life for you." I took a step back, creating a physical and symbolic distance between us. "Good luck." I turned and walked to the front door. I did not run. I did not rush. I simply walked away. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to look back. The aftermath was exactly as I had predicted. As Sun Tzu wrote, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." My victory wasn't in a final, explosive confrontation, but in my quiet, resolute withdrawal. Without me as the central pillar holding everything up, Sophia's chaotic world quickly crumbled under its own weight. I learned through occasional brief updates from Logan that she was completely overwhelmed. She couldn't manage 5 children, a newborn, and the basic logistics of a household. When Blake finally returned from his deployment a month later, he walked into a house in total disarray. Faced with the raw, unfiltered reality of the life he had helped create but had never truly participated in, he did what cowards do. He fled. He filed for divorce and moved to another state, leaving Sophia to drown in the consequences of their shared irresponsibility. The neighbors, having heard the truth about the false police report, kept their distance. Sophia, for the first time in her life, was truly, completely alone, a prisoner in a fortress of her own making. But I kept my promise. I never abandoned the children. My love for them hadn't changed, but the delivery system had. I established a new kind of support network, one built on mentorship from a safe distance. Every Sunday evening at 1900 hours, we had a mandatory FaceTime call. It became our new ritual. I wasn't there to manage their lives, but to guide them. I listened to their stories from school, helped Ellie brainstorm ideas for her art projects, and praised Hunter for keeping his room clean. I taught Logan how to manage a simple budget, setting him up with his own debit card linked to the child support funds Blake was now legally obligated to send. He was in charge of using it for incidental expenses, school supplies, a pizza on Friday night, and had to show me the transaction history each week. He rose to the occasion, a young man discovering his own strength. Using Blake's money, I also signed them up for a HelloFresh subscription, 3 meals a week. It took the pressure off Logan and Ellie for cooking every single night, and I called in my most trusted ally. Master Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, true to her word, would swing by the house every couple of weeks, unannounced, for a welfare check. Her mere presence enough to ensure things didn't completely fall apart. I was a constant, stable, and positive influence in their lives, but from a distance that kept me safe from the gravitational pull of Sophia's toxicity. Months passed. My new life settled into a rhythm of satisfying work, intense study, and peaceful solitude. My days were governed by the orderly principles of the Army, my nights by the quiet ambition of my own dreams. The memory of my 3-year ordeal began to feel less like an open wound and more like a healed-over scar. A permanent part of me, but one that no longer ached with every movement. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, I found it in my mailbox. A large, stiff manila envelope. In the top left corner was the official seal of the United States Army, and the return address read, Human Resources Command, Fort Knox, Kentucky. My breath caught in my throat. I walked back to my room, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. This was it. I sat on the edge of my bed and held the envelope in my hands for a long moment. My fingers, usually so steady, trembled slightly as I tore open the flap. I pulled out a single, crisp sheet of official letterhead. My eyes scanned the formal military language, but they landed on one sentence. Be it known that Sergeant Lilia Brennan has been selected for, and is hereby offered acceptance to, the United States Army Officer Candidate School. I read the sentence again, and again. The paper began to blur as tears I didn't know I was holding back began to fall. They weren't tears of sadness or pain. They were tears of joy, of pride, of a profound, soul-deep sense of release. I had fought on so many fronts, against my sister's manipulations, against my own guilt, against a system that had momentarily turned on me. I had held my ground, strategized, and pushed forward. The hardest battle, the one fought for myself, was finally, decisively, won. The Georgia heat at Fort Benning was a thick, suffocating blanket. The red clay stained our uniforms, the humidity clung to our skin, and the obstacle courses were designed by sadists. For 12 weeks, Officer Candidate School did its best to break us down, to find our limits and push us past them. We were too tired, too sore, too hungry, too everything. And I had never felt more alive. I wasn't the youngest candidate in my platoon, nor was I the fastest. But I had an advantage none of the fresh-faced college graduates around me possessed. They were being forged in the fires of OCS. I'd already been through my own personal crucible. The sleep deprivation, the psychological stress, the constant demand to perform under pressure, it was all familiar territory. The chaos of a simulated ambush was nothing compared to the quiet, sustained chaos of my sister's house. I had been tested in a different kind of fire, and it had made me stronger, more resilient than I ever knew. I didn't just pass the tests, I excelled. I became a natural leader, the calm center in the storm that the other candidates looked to when the pressure was on. One evening, after a grueling day of land navigation, I was sitting on my bunk, cleaning the Georgia mud from my rifle, when I checked my email. There was one from Ellie. I opened it. There was no text, just a single attached image file. It was a drawing she had made. In it, a figure that was clearly me stood tall in an army uniform. But in her drawing, I wasn't holding a rifle. I was holding a book. And gathered around my feet, looking up at me with smiling faces, were 4 small children. At the bottom, in Ellie's careful developing handwriting, were 6 words. To the strongest ant in the world. I stared at the drawing for a long time, the familiar sting of tears returning to my eyes. The legacy I was building wasn't one of bitterness or resentment. The boundaries I'd fought so hard to create hadn't destroyed our love. They had allowed it to finally grow in a healthy way. My legacy, I realized, was the strength and hope I had managed to plant in the hearts of those children. The day of graduation was bright and clear. We stood in perfect formation on the parade field, a sea of proud soldiers in our immaculate dress uniforms. The ceremony was a blur of speeches, of tradition, of pomp and circumstance. Then, they began calling our names. Officer Candidate Lilia Brennan. I marched crisply onto the stage, my heart hammering with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. I saluted the commanding officer and turned to face the crowd. It was time for the pinning ceremony, the tradition where a family member or mentor pins the gold bars of a second lieutenant onto the new officer's shoulders. The announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeaker. Pinning on Second Lieutenant Brennan's rank is her nephew, Mr. Logan Miller. A young man stepped out from the crowd. He was no longer the lanky, uncertain boy I'd left behind. At 17, he was tall and broad-shouldered, carrying himself with a quiet confidence that made my heart swell. Dressed in a crisp suit and tie, he looked every bit the man he was becoming. He walked up to me, his eyes shining. With hands that were steady and sure, he took the 2 small, gleaming gold bars and carefully pinned them onto the shoulders of my uniform. He finished one side, then the other, ensuring they were perfectly straight. Then he leaned in close, his voice a low whisper meant only for me. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for teaching me what honor is." In that single moment, every sacrifice, every tear, every ounce of pain from the last 3 years became worth it. This was my true victory. This was more precious than any rank. The story ends here, but my life was just beginning. The final image is not one of conflict, but of peace. It is the following morning. The sun is just beginning to rise over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I am standing at the base of a flagpole, a newly commissioned second lieutenant in the United States Army. The bugle call of reveille echoes across the quiet post as the American flag begins its slow, majestic ascent. I raise my hand in a sharp, perfect salute. The morning light catches my face. It's a face that carries the faint, healed-over scars of a long and difficult war. But my eyes are clear, bright with hope and an unshakable resolve. My war is over. My mission is complete. This is my new dawn. That sunrise wasn't just the start of a new day. It was the start of a new life, one that I fought for and built for myself. My mission to save myself is complete, but a new one is just beginning. Sharing this story in the hopes that it gives strength to someone else who feels trapped, invisible, or undervalued. If my journey resonated with you and you believe in the power of defining your own future, please subscribe to this channel and join our community. Let me know one thing in the comments. What does honor mean to you?